All right, I'm in the process of just doing the initial pull on this. I've got the back cover here, and I'm just going to lay it down so I can kind of navigate a little bit better. I got the back cover. There are a number of screws that are holding stuff. You know, some of these holes aren't actually screw holes, but the corners, you've got the edges and stuff like that. But I wanted to talk about one thing that's really important whenever you're doing restorations, renovations, repairs, anything like that. It's important that anything you do be non-destructive, meaning if you're gonna open something up, if you're gonna mess with something, don't make it any worse. You know, that's the whole point of this, is you're trying to make things better. You're trying to make things cleaner. You're trying to make things run if they don't run. And one thing that I noticed with this that's a really nice learning opportunity is when you've got these screws and you're using a screwdriver and you're trying to extract screws. It's a very simple thing that people futz up all the time. Let's get rid of that glare. Let's just turn that down a little bit. When you're removing screws, okay, your screwdriver should sit down in there nice and tight. This one's a little bit loose, so that's part of the problem. But as you're removing screws, if you start to round off the inside of the screw, that is destructive. That can't be repaired. That means you need to put a new screw in there. So if the screw is so tight that you can't get it out, you either need to put a lot of down pressure on the screw in order to get it out, or you're using the wrong size screwdriver, or the screw itself is seized up. If the screw itself is seized up, you have to look at what you're working on to try to figure out how to get it loose. You can't just put like liquid wrench in there or something like that and try to expect that it's going to loosen up because it's rusty, because you're going to screw things up. You're going to get that crap down in the chassis of whatever you're working on. That could be very bad. So you just have to be really careful. Down pressure will usually do it, and I'm not putting any pressure on this right now. I'm just using this to illustrate. But when you start to do that with screws, when you round out of the screw with the tip of your screwdriver, that's going to fuck up the screw. So don't do that. Okay? That's always the first thing. The other thing is, whenever you're working on something, have a tray. In this case, I'm using a paper plate because this thing has that goo all over it. But have a tray to put your stuff into while you're doing a particular step. When you're done with a particular step, put it in a little Ziploc bag. I have a ton of these around. They're basically used as parts bags. And I'll take a Sharpie marker on here, and I'll, in the order that I do things, sometimes because this is the first part of what I'm doing to repair this particular pedal, I'll put a number 1 on here because I know that number 1, I removed all of the screws from the bottom of the pedal so that I could take the plate off, take the cover off the bottom of it. So I'll put 1, bottom plate screws or something like that, so I know what they are. And then when I do the next thing, which might be to remove internal screws to get a PCB board off of the top of this, that'll be number 2. So I'll take one of these bags and I'll write a 2 on it, and I'll write PCB board screws. Or maybe it's the nuts that are holding the input and output jacks on. Or maybe it's the pins that are holding on the pedal and the bolt here that holds on the spindle of the wah pedal. So those are things that you can do to make sure that when you put it back together, you reverse the steps. You start with the biggest number because that's the order that you did things in. That's a reverse of the order that you did things in. So make sure that when you're taking something apart, number 1, non-destructive. Don't make it any worse. Number 2, keep track of what you're doing and keep track of the parts that you're taking out of something, but also keep track of the order that you're taking those parts out in, because that's very important to when you put it back together. And one other thing that I didn't mention in the other video, this pedal was actually sitting out and it was raining at the time. So if you have something that you think is wet, you either need to let it sit for a long time before it dries, or, yeah, see, look, there's like little pieces of maple tree seed here. You either need to sit and let it dry for a long time, or more importantly, or more preferred in this case, you want to open it up and you want to make sure that everything's dry. Visual search of all of the components to make sure that there's nothing down in there, particularly if you've got a situation where you've got knobs that are, not exposing what's going on underneath the knob. I don't know if there's any moisture trapped in here, in other words. I don't know if there's moisture sitting on the board. This is all low voltage, so it's not, going to be crazy in terms of the opportunity for explosion or things like that, but it's going to fry your board. If you've got moisture, that arcs parts together that aren't supposed to be combined, you can destroy microprocessors or chips or whatever's in here. Not microprocessors, but chips, resistors, you know, stuff like that. You don't want to have to replace that stuff and figure out line by line where your issues are. So better to just make sure that you open it up, look at everything, make sure that it's dry, and then also put it back together enough so that when you turn it on to try it, if it's not fully closed, that it's at least enclosed so that it's not exposed, so you don't actually accidentally touch the board with anything metal, or jar the board so that you crack components or anything like that. So lots of little important things as you're going through and working on something. Just keep all that in mind.